Not
stupid
allowed.
things. But so to me, this is when I find myself making judgmental, having judgmental thoughts, I usually can keep them from coming out of my mouth, but I do recognize that I have them. I really do try to take that step back and pause and try to figure out, okay, what is this about? Because it's usually not about the other person. It's usually about me. But I'm throwing it on the other person because obviously they just cut me off and I'm not happy with them or whatever it is please don't get me started on North Carolinians not knowing how to merge. But anyway, that's a whole other show right there. So what, I mean, other than pausing, because I think that's that first step in this process of compassionate listening is kind of calling ourselves out, going, what is that about? So other than pausing, what would you guys recommend to do?
Well, the one thing, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, and maybe say a little bit more, is again, we often in trainings will say that the very first step is what you believe.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that the person in front of you is worthy of being heard, of their feelings, of their reactions, even if you disagree, but are they worthy human beings? Because we believe that if you don't believe that you don't believe everyone is of worth, that you're not going to really listen well, because you're not going to care as much, if that makes sense. I mean, that's part of less what you do, though there are lots of things you can do or not do, but also what you believe. That's something that we speak about a lot.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you said that, because that truly is the key. And sometimes this starts early on. I mean, I remember not terribly long ago, I was having a conversation with my mother, and something had led to this conversation about what was I like as a child. And she said, well, you would hold perceived hurts to yourself and then you would explode. And I went, well, that explains so much right there, because it was this judgment that what I was feeling wasn't valid. And I think that's where it starts with a lot of times where, we forget what it's like to be a kid and what we didn't know. And so, our kids have these, big feelings that are hard for us to deal with. And I think that's where the process kind of gets started about, well, because again, I used to tell my kids I ran a benevolent dictatorship. I was willing to listen to what they had to say, and then Dad and I would make a decision about how we were going to move forward. But I always did try to take the time to really listen to what they were saying. And to me, that's a really big first step. Is that sound about right?
Yeah, I'd like to add too, I think sometimes we judge certain feelings that people express. Like, I remember with my children, we watched this Pixar movie that came out maybe a decade ago called Inside Out. And I encourage you to watch that, because I think they really hit the nail on the head when they basically highlight, let's say, six feelings that we all have, but how historically we've always elevated joy as being the feeling to shoot for, that we should all be joyful, and diminishing fear and anger and disappointment and sadness. And those feelings have just as much value as joy. And I think we're all prone to that, to judge other people's feelings. And one of the things that somebody tells you that we pride ourselves is just validating all of the feelings, that every single feeling. So generally, we don't have too many people that approach us expressing a whole lot of joy. Maybe they will after we've journeyed with them for a while, but it's also just validating the sadness, validating the anger, the disappointment, the fear. It all matters. It's all part of being human.
Yeah, I make it a point to never talk about positive and negative feelings. I talk about easier and more challenging feelings for that very reason, because there is this tendency to dismiss the ones that it's like, I don't want you to be sad. I don't want you to be angry. I don't want you to be frustrated. I want you to be happy. And it's like, whoa, that's not what I'm feeling right now. And so, we do have this idea that somehow some feelings are okay and other ones are not. And and then that just sends them underground and they come out in not particularly productive ways because we can ignore them, but they're not going to ignore us. So, anything else you'd like the listeners to know about compassionate listening, the importance of it, and how to do it?
Well, again, this is probably a little bit of self-promotion, but we did have a book that came out this January called Listening 2 by 2, A Paradigm Shift for Leaders. That's where the magic happens. And in that book, we wanted to create a book that could be read literally on an airplane flight. So no one has an excuse not to read. That it could be read in 2 to 3 hours. And we offer just some really practical steps that could be implemented in your personal and your professional life to be just a better leader, ultimately to be a better human. So for example, we use an acronym, LISTEN, LISTEN, and then we break it down and we'll just give you the first letter. For example, lean in, remove barriers. We all can have barriers to our relationship, whatever they could be, physical barriers, emotional barriers, but try to remove barriers. So those are the type of, simplistic wisdom that we offered in this book, and we'd love for people to go on Amazon and get copies for yourself and your team.
And we actually you talked about one of the next letters earlier, and you used the word curious. Well, the I in listen, LISTEN, the I stands for interested and curious. Again, it's part of that whole worth that you're interested in other people's, what they have to say, what their experiences have been, what their feelings are, what they've gone through. So to be interested, to be curious about them, to know that every person has important things that they can share and offer. So that, those kinds of things, that's really important.
Terrific. Can you tell the listeners where they can, I'm assuming they can buy the book on Amazon, but I'm sure it's available other places, and how to find out more about Someone to Tell It To?
Our website is someonetotellitto.org. And you can find out a lot of information there. We are also on Facebook and on Twitter and Instagram. So there are daily posts that are put out, and so there are ways to learn, to understand more about what it is we do, what it is we believe, and share with people.
And they can also tune into our podcast, the Someone to Tell To podcast series.
Well, yes. Terrific. And so I want to thank you so much for being on the show. And I also want to let people know that Carl Menninger said, when we are listened to, it creates us, makes us unfold and expand. And I really think that's what compassionate listening invites. And you are listening to understand and to be curious and learn instead of just listening to respond. And that can make all the difference in your relationships. And so one of the things that I hope you also will continue to do to help your relationship is to continue listening to this show. And until next week, stay loving.